Hi everybody, this is Sam Hunter at Hunter's Design Studio, and today we're doing a demo of how to do a Y-seam. So when you find a Y-seam in a pattern, there's usually one of two things going on. You're either setting a square into a square notch like this, or if you would consider this to be something like a border, where this is your quilt top, and this coming in as a border, and this coming in as a border, this would be called a mitered corner. So it's anywhere where you're bringing three seams together in a way that you can't just sort of sew through it in one line. And if you do, you're gonna get an awfully weird little lump going on in the corner. So we're gonna look at it like star points going into a background for today. If you were doing a mitered border, this seam and this seam would be the first ones that you sew. Usually in a set into a star, this seam is the first one, and then these two follow. It actually doesn't matter which order you do them in, as long as they all get done. So the first thing we're gonna do is turn everything over and find the back of the fabric. And this is just stuff that came out of my scrap box. So it's not terribly important. You can see I've got a piece of selvage still sticking out over here. So the first thing that we have to do is find the point at the three places here that are going to join together. And that point is going to be along the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm using a ballpoint pen today. I don't recommend that you do that, but I'm doing it because I know it's going to work and I know you'll be able to see it. So the first thing that I'm going to do to get that point is draw where the seams would be coming into it, just at the point. And what I'm looking for is the intersection of what would be the 2/4 inch seams, okay? Let's get a little darker on there. Okay, does that make sense? So there's one of them, all right? And I'm gonna go off and do that over here as well. You don't need to draw the entire seam. You just need about a 1/2 inch of line where the seams are going to intersect, because the point is what we're joining up in all of these situations. So there's another one, and then I'm going to draw one on here. A little darker. So if you don't want to use a ballpoint pen, you could use a friction pen. They iron off, but be careful, they do have some chemical residue that can reappear, especially if they get cold. We also don't know what the long-term historical impact of that chemical in the fabric is. You can definitely use a pencil. You can use any of the chalk marking tools. If you're going to use one of the wash away pens, be careful. If you iron that before it's washed away, it will tend to stain. So pencil's probably your best bet on the back of a quilt. And obviously if this is really light fabric, then go quite gently about how you're going to get that point. So the first thing we're going to do is sew these two guys together. And this is one of the few instances in quilting where you don't sew all the way to the edge of the seam allowance. I'm going to drop my needle right down on that point. I'm going to do a couple of locking stitches. I prefer to go forward a couple, go back a couple, and go back no further than the point, overdoing whatever lock stitch or bullet stitch might appear on your machine. Mostly because when you do a bullet, what it actually does is it starts in the middle and it goes around in a very tiny circle. And that leaves a heck of a lot of thread all lumped up in that one place. And we're going to be bringing this and this point together, so I'd rather not have those lumps. So I'm just going to start here. I'm going to go forward a couple stitches. I'm going to go back a couple stitches, and I'm going to complete the seam. Okay. A lot of people ask kind of what kind of seam allowance you should have. I'm on a Janome, and I'm at a 2. I often sew at a 1/8. 1/7 or 1/8 if I'm paper piecing, but I like to. What you want is a stitch that is small enough to not rip out at the seam allowance, but also large enough to still wiggle the point of a seam ripper into it if you have to. So I'm going to go 1, 2, then backwards 1, 2, and then forward and complete the seam. Okay, and at this point, we're not pressing anything. So I've got those two guys. Now, what I have to do is join that point to that point, and then over here, join that point to that point also. So the way we do it, this feels kind of weird, you kind of fold one side pretty much out of the way, get your hands on this one, and pick him up and get him up against that one, loosely put those guys together. And now we have to make sure these points are adequately, let's say, is that a bent pin? So I'm going to put a pin through on this side, all right? And then I'm going to put a pin through on that side. I'm going to guess that I'm pretty close there. Not close enough. Okay. So now I have the pin all the way through both of the points that I want joined up. And this is a point where it's really important that you keep the pin lined up straight. Don't let it wiggle sideways this way or this way, because it'll actually let the fabric shift apart from each other as well. So keep that point together, and we're rotating on that until we get these two guys to line up. Okay, and I'm fussing here to make sure I'm sort of maintaining straight. I'm just going to tuck the pin in like that. And then I'm going to come along here, and I'm going to pop another pin in for stability. I never sew over pins. I use a seam guard to get my 1/4 inch seam. So if I'm pinning sideways, I run into the pins, and that's not always comfortable. But I've found, I know a lot of people say you can run over them. It's a round thing. Your needle's going to choose which side of the pin it's going to go to. I've actually bent a pin into my machine, and that was a rather expensive repair job. Not to mention the inconvenience of not having my machine while it was being repaired. So I don't sew over pins. So what I'm going to do is pop this, hold this really tight here, pop this pin out, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to drop my needle right down on that intersection. Okay. I'm going to go forward a couple, 1, 2, back it up, 1, 2, no further than that dot, and then I'm going to complete the seam. Okay, so now if I open this up, you can see that it's beginning to come together, all right? So we got a little bit of a crease here, don't worry about him. Now we're gonna fold this one sort of out of the way and rinse and repeat in this direction, okay? This is why this is so hard to draw in a pattern. I mean, how do you draw all this sort of floppy stuff, right? And we're gonna double check again, the pin that we're putting through here is going to come out, ooh, look at that, nowhere close, is gonna come out at the point here so that those two stay in alignment, okay? So I've got those two aligned. I'm gonna pop another pin in here for stability. In Y-Seams, I prefer, if at all possible at this point, to always sew away from the seam that I'm trying to make, mostly because if there's any wibbly, wobbly bulk, it's going to move out of the block. It's not going to be shoved into the corner to make a little pleat or crease. So again, I've got this pretty well tight here. I've got one stable here. It doesn't matter that I sewed that one from the diamond and this one from the square. They're all going to get done. So again, I'm going to hold this guy tight. In fact, I'm going to stabilize him this way until I get myself lined up here. I'm going to drop right down on that point with my needle. Go forward a couple. And go back a couple, but no more. And complete the seam. Okay. All right, moment of truth. Alrighty, so now when I give that a hearty press, you can see that all of these other creases are going to come out, and you can see that that's pretty well connected. And again, you can do this by sewing here, here, and then finishing with this one. Now, how do we press this guy? I like pressing the square down towards the point, and I don't press open very often, but on this particular seam, any diagonal seam coming in, careful, you can have bias on these guys, so don't stretch him. I just open him out and press him down like that. I've got an iron over here, so I'm just going to quickly do that. There we go. And that's what it looks like on the back, pressed down here, opened out here. And on this side, we have a really nice, clean intersection. Now, one of our Inner Circles members wrote in, and she's working on a pattern where it's a house type block. So it's a square with a peak on it. And you have a row of those, sort of like this, and you have another row that's coming in and interlocking like this. So if this was half of one house and this was the peak of the next house, and then this is half of the third house, you would sew into you would join this row of houses, join this row of houses. Sew into this peak with this well marked, and then you'd come out and then pivot and sew into that peak, and then come out and pivot it and then sew into that peak. The difficult thing, or the thing that sort of catches us out, most of the time we're used to our chain piecing or being able to like come into something, pivot, and then keep going. In this one, you get to come down here, but then you have to come completely out of the project to come back in this side. So it's a lot of picking up and lifting, but it's very, very easy to do. This isn't something to be intimidated by. The most critical thing is mark it really well to find those points. Don't stitch beyond them, only stitch out of the seam, don't stitch backwards. And remember that a hot steamy iron will take care of most of the little wibbles and wobbles that you actually get. So this is it for Y-Seams today. If you have any questions, obviously reach out and ask them. You can either leave comments in the video, or you can always contact me through the contact page at Hunter's Design Studio. I'm here to help you have more fun while you make more stuff. All right, have a great one.